I hope you found the first session this morning as interesting as I did, but I also understand that the breakout rooms were really engaging. There was some fantastic discussion going on there. I heard some of the feedback, and there were a few things that are coming out that are really important to reflect upon. Particularly one breakout rooms was mainly emphasizing the importance of engaging men and boys, something that we always talk about, but perhaps don't do enough of, just looking at the lack of men on this next panel. But also the importance of operationalizing gender equality. And, in one of the breakout rooms, what was coming out very strongly was the importance of, taking to the local government, to the police level, these commitments that often are made at national level, but are not taken down, not really operationalized further down. But there were also others reflecting on the causes for optimism that we need to hang on to, particularly the resilience of the women have demonstrated and continue to demonstrate, but also the increased activism, from Me Too onwards. Something is changing, something is starting to shift more deeply, and so we need to just continue to seize that momentum. But please continue to contribute your ideas, through the Jamboard. I think colleagues will be posting the Jamboard link in the chat as well, so that all of these will come then in the next steps that recommendations we're gonna share after the conference. But we're now going to move to the next session on voice and leadership. And that's something that my colleague who is going to moderate the next panel knows a lot about, is the director of our politics and governance team, Catherine Wajak-Dahu. Catherine is a leader on politics and governance, fragility, peace building, you name it. But we're also really proud that Catherine was listed as one of the UK's 100 most influential people of African Caribbean and African American heritage in Powerlist 2021. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, for that wonderful introduction. So yes, my name's Catherine Nwajaku-Dahu, and I'm the director of the Politics and Governance Programme here at ODI. So delighted to be chairing this panel today. So I'd like to welcome you to this second session of the conference on charting the way forward to forward-looking agenda for gender equality through political voice and leadership. So despite some of the gains, we've already discussed this, I imagine, throughout the day, despite some of the gains in the political space over the last 25 years, many gender unequal attitudes and stereotypes persist and continue to hold back equality and achievements. And we know that even when women do enter political spaces, they come up against gender-based issues or biases within these very male-dominated spaces. So today we're going to delve into what has led to progress over the last 25 years, notwithstanding some of the barriers, and what critical action might be necessary to speed up some of the change that we've already witnessed. So we'll be exploring some of these key barriers to women's leadership and political voice, and addressing even those invisible barriers that many of us can't see, but we certainly know that they are there. So how these barriers in different settings operate, in conflict settings, local versus national politics, and in issue-based leadership. So how intersectional issues shape the political space, and what actions can support diversity and representation in leadership and politics, issues very close to my heart. So what does gender-sensitive feminist leadership actually look like in practice? And how can leaders help progress gender equality aims? How can we foster more gender-sensitive and intersectional leadership, including among men? Sarah highlighted that earlier. Their noticeable absence is a story in itself. So what are some of the examples and lessons from COVID-19, in fact, in terms of response that we might wish to build on? So I'm excited to say that we have a great panel with us today. We recognize that bringing in different perspectives to the conversation has always been very important. And so our selected panel is representative of women in political and leadership spheres. So here we are today, and with us we have Her Excellency Wafa Bani Mustafa, So Her Excellency is a lawyer and member of the House of Representatives in the Jordanian Parliament for 3 terms consecutively, representing the Jerash Governorate. She is the chairperson of the coalition of women MPs from Arab countries to combat violence against women, consisting of 13 Arab countries. She is also the founder in the Forum of Arab Parliamentarians for Population and Development. So welcome. We also have on our panel Meredith Preston McGee, Secretary General of the Centre for Global Pluralism. Meredith has devoted more than 20 years to addressing conflict and stability in Africa and Asia. She has worked with the Naga in Northeast India and indigenous communities on the Thai-Myanmar border to support UN efforts in Kosovo, also in northern Iraq and several African countries. So her work has involved frontline negotiation, policy and diplomacy. So welcome, Meredith. We also have on our panel today, Shannon O'Connell, Senior Gender Advisor at the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. Welcome, Shannon. Shannon has extensive experience in politics, policy advocacy and elections. She has worked on more than 24 electoral campaigns, largely for women candidates. She has served as Senior Advisor to Dawn Purvis, MLA, former leader of the Progressive Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, and was also an advisor and campaign manager for the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition in the first elections after the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. Welcome, very big welcome to you, Shannon. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have Laurel Weldon, Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Simon Fraser University. Welcome, Laurel. So publisher of When and Why Do Governments Promote Women's Rights? Laurel's book examines women's rights policies, focusing on violence against women, but also ranging across issues from economic empowerment to family law. So Laurel has consulted for a wide range of governmental and intergovernmental bodies, including Indigenous governments in British Columbia, UN Women in New York, and the World Bank in DC. So welcome our illustrious panel today. So I'll start, first of all, before we allow our speakers to speak, I will start by letting you know that we will be taking questions, as Sarah said, during this panel, but you can put them in the chat box. We won't be taking them here, but we'll discuss them later in the breakouts. They'll be captured and explored in those sessions. We also have the Google Jamboard to gather your comments, observations, and so on. Let me just say before I let loose our speakers that I will be giving everyone roughly 4 minutes, and I'll be quite strict on time so we can get through this and hear everybody before going into the next session. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Her Excellency Wafa Bani Mustafa. Please, Wafa. So I'm going to start off by asking you what you think. I spoke of key barriers in my rather long introduction. So for you, what are the key barriers in the space of women's leadership and political voice, including deep-set discriminatory gender norms, which can sometimes act as invisible barriers to many women in politics? So what changes have been achieved and what has driven this change? Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this opportunity. And I will speak speedily about the big challenges for a woman from Arabic region, from Jordan, to be part of political leadership and to be elected for 3 terms in the parliament. But actually, I end my 3rd terms in September 2020, and I not running for the last election. The challenges here is the election law and the election regulation. We should always see this as one of the challenges here in Jordan. This law does not provide enough chance for women to integrate in politics. Although here in Jordan we have the quota system in our law, this advantage may transform from being a measure to guarantee the representation for women in the parliament to begin the highest limits of women's representation. And this is, I think, one of our big challenges. The other things is is that there are efforts to depict women as competitors with each other only in a certain area allocated for them, and that they will not be in a competitive position with men. For example, women, when I was a member in Jordan Parliament for 3 terms, it's okay to compete to chair the women committee, but it's not okay to compete the men to chair other committees or higher position inside the parliament. And if we go and make it, we will face a lot of obstacles. Another challenge, and we work a lot now for it, is the political violence, and especially the cyber violence here, or the cyberbullying. It's become a big issue in Arab country, and especially in Jordan, because it's make the environment of the public life and political life anti-women environment. It's become uneasy to any women to become a leadership or MP or minister. So there is a lot of politician women withdraw from the politics. And we send a wrong message for the future female leaders who are looking now to the political environment as unsafety, unhealthy environment to go and work on it or to engage with it. So this is very important. And also the male domination over leading position inside the political parties is one of the challenges, because the major decision within the parties coming from the men, which are related to the candidate of the elections. So a few chances for women to be candidate in easy districts or election circles, because the men taking the decision always inside the parties. And in Jordan, we cannot ignore the big challenge of economic challenge. For example, women cannot run for election if they don't have enough financial resource, and there are less chances for women to invest in them engaging political life than men. And this is some of our big challenges. And I will give you some maybe statistic about Jordan and about the Arab region. You know, we have in the world 20 only 20 governments and countries headed by women, and there are no Arab countries among them. We have also in the map of the women in politics, women now represent more than 50% ministerial position in 14 countries, and there are no Arab countries among them. Also, the percentage of the average of women in the parliament in the MENA is only 16.6%, and no only one country the parliament headed by women, and it is Bahrain. The highest Arab country percentage of women representation is Emirates. It's became 50% in 2020, and the lowest percentage in Yemen, and the percentage there is 0.3%. In Jordan, in 2020, we had the election before exactly 1 month ago. The female representation in the lower house decreased to 11.5%, and it was in the last election or before 15.4%. And the female also representation of a ministerial position in Arab world, the highest percentage is in Lebanon, 31.6%. But today they nominated a new government, and we didn't know how many ladies will be there, while Saudi Arabia got the lowest rank with 0%. In Jordan, the last cabinet, the percentage of women decreased to 9.4%, with only 3 ministers or female ministers in the cabinet out of 32.
Your Excellency, I'm sorry to have to interrupt you, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to have to ask you to bring to a close your presentation.
I will close by this. Through my 10 years in the parliament, I can tell you it's more easy for women to go to the positions like municipalities and the local council, because we reach in Jordan 42% in these councils. But when it's linked with position, with power, authority, and money, it's become harder for women to engage the leadership position. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you have illustrated excellently for us some of the barriers, financial, political, normative barriers to women's progress in the political sphere. So thank you very much. I'd like now to turn to Meredith Preston McGee, Secretary General for the Centre for Global Pluralism. So if I could ask you then, how do you think feminist leadership needs pluralism? How can governments fund and support so they take up the mantle of leading on inclusion and diversity and not just pay lip service in addressing inequalities? And how can we elevate grassroots peacemakers instead of leaving the heavy lifting to them, and interrogate how norms around class can be underlying barriers for women's advancement? So over to you, Meredith. Thank you.
Catherine, thank you for teeing up my remarks so beautifully, and a huge thank you to Sarah and to the organizers of the conference for inviting me to speak. You know, I was reading this week that a recent study on G7 countries is seeing a decline in support for both gender equality and women's leadership among the younger generations. you know, this trend may be exacerbated by what's happening around the world this year, but I think it's a real sign that the pendulum has already been swinging in the wrong direction. And so I've really been reflecting on where I felt through my experience women's leadership was being accepted, where it was not, and what had really made a difference. I've worked on peace processes for the last 20 years, so that's really one of the areas I'll speak to. And, you know, women's voices have been hugely consequential in those processes, despite a real lack of progress on developing inclusive peace processes, despite extraordinary efforts by grassroots women and civil society. And in each place where I worked, the women speaking out, the women leading, have faced a backlash for being the leaders that they are in these processes. Too often, the tools that are used to undermine them are not simply around their identity as women, but as members of a particular ethnic group or class or some other marker of difference that intersects with their gender. And I mention this as the head of the Global Center for Pluralism. I feel like it's particularly important to think about how support for women's leadership is embedded in the wider fabric of perceptions and attitudes towards diversity in society. These are really things I don't think we can separate out. You know, pluralism, as we conceive it, is about taking this positive view of diversity to advance a more just and peaceful and prosperous society. And the success of women's leadership is really closely tied to these commitments to pluralism. What I've seen too often is that women have made gains against the grain in their own societies through extraordinary struggles of their own. And rather than as a part of wider pluralistic development or evolution in that society. And so when we unpack women's leadership struggles, it's really clear that the tide right now is in the other direction, towards more inward looking, more nationalist, narrow identity discourse, which often, of course, takes a misogynist view of traditional gender roles and is holding back women's leadership. I think Her Excellency Wafa spoke really clearly to that in her region. As we say at the Global Center for Pluralism, feminist leadership needs pluralism if we're going to advance and sustain the goals. This is essentially the soil in which feminist leadership can be rooted. So what does this mean, for example, in women in leadership and peace processes? Beyond identifying women and expecting them to chart the path, we need to reframe how we approach conflict and how we seek to resolve it. A transformational approach to peacemaking can do many things, but for me, there's sort of two really key points. One is to root all decision-making around peacemaking in a basis of a commitment to pluralism. And the second is to support, protect, empower, but most importantly, be guided by women leaders, particularly grassroots women, as the key leaders in peace processes and not as a sort of an add-on to the margins. And for too long, the burden to get parties to include, to look at inclusion in these processes has really been borne by civil society. And I think now is the time that the pressures for this leadership, feminist leadership, pluralist leadership, comes from governments who will place this issue as really central to their foreign policy. And what that, of course, means is committing to spend the political capital needed to make these things happen. Before I concluded though, Catherine, there was one other question that had been discussed in the preparation that I wanted to speak to, which was around what strategies can we think about that shift social and cultural norms towards greater support for women's leadership. And when we talk about pluralism, we focus a lot on the interplay between the institutional hardware for pluralism, our legal frameworks, and the social, cultural sort of software that societies have to sort of uphold the laws, the policies that govern all of us. And the interplay between the hardware and the software, essentially, of pluralism in a society is that sort of complex web that makes up a pluralist society. And so we need to identify spaces where we can impact, particularly the software of pluralism, and connect with all members of society, and where these issues can be really influential. And of course, there's so many areas where the cultural narratives, and again, to Wafa's speaking about women being in specific roles and not being sort of entered into other spaces, to think about where the cultural narrative is shaped. And for me, one of those really powerful spaces is education. And as we all know, we're in an educational crisis around the world as a result of the events of the last year. And if we're going to go beyond recovery and build women's leadership as part of that recovery, we need to really focus on developing the whole person and the minds of the next generation. And to do that, we need to invest in educational institutions beyond the ABCs, as it were, to look at teaching methods and curricula that foster critical thinking, constructive engagement with difference, embracing of complexity, strong analytical capacity among these young people. And if we really commit to spending time and resources on that, I think we set the groundwork for women's leaders, but importantly also supporters of women's leadership and more broadly pluralistic citizens for the future. So I'll stop there. I hope I've sort of hit my time.
Wow. Wow. This is an illustrious panel. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. Pluralism at the center of advancing women's rights, as central to feminism being promoted as we move on, and also the role of government in taking up the baton that is so far being held by civil society. Some very interesting reflections there. So I'd like to turn now to you, Shannon O'Connell, Director of Programs at the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. So Shannon, in the light of your experience, what practical insights on improving programming can encourage women in decision-making positions? For example, how do policies and programs intersect with community? We've heard from Meredith the importance of taking community, grassroots women leaders as central and not peripheral to decision-making. So how do policies and programs intersect with community and individual action to change the hearts and minds in this space? Over to you.
Thank you, Catherine, very much. And thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this discussion, a fantastic discussion. So if you don't mind, where I'd like to start in the 4-minute journey of how to change the world is in the formal political spaces. And I'm going to introduce an actor into our discussion, which is not everybody's favorite actor, but it's one of those, if it didn't exist, you'd have to invent it. And that is the actor of political parties. So what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is start looking specifically in formal political spaces and then bring in those community aspects that you raised there, Catherine. So of course, we all know that women exercise political leadership every day in many different forms. They just don't often get a title or a salary or an office or a plaque on the door that comes with this. This speaks to the point that Wafa was making. Wafa is somebody that I've been working with for a long time on these very important issues. Hello, my friend. But that women are allowed to take what I refer to in politics as liability. So responsibility without authority. Usually at the local level, but then that step into formal authority gets much harder when there is power, there is resources, there is decision-making authority. And that barrier often comes from political parties. We have a structural problem there when it comes to political parties. Political parties have 2 primary functions in our societies. That's it. But those are unique functions. The first, of course, is to fight and win political competitions. So things like elections, policy debates, political competitions around the narrative of how society should be formed, what the social contract is, what our expectations should be, what our institutions should be. And those tend to be functions that involve or invite very high-risk behaviors, short-term gains, short-term thinking. The other function of political parties, of course, is to govern and lead. And by govern and leading, I don't just mean being in power or being in government, but actually being in opposition, doing things like developing evidence-based policy, knowing how to work with data and analysis, building the internal capacity to investigate problems and source problem-solving options, having consultation functions and mechanisms within them as organizations, knowing how to run a negotiation in a way that is not a carve up, right? You get that piece of the pie, you get that piece of the pie. Meredith will have seen a lot of this in her peace building work, where this type of negotiation is handled as a means to stop the fighting, but not as a means to actually solve problems. And that's usually the point at which women are excluded. Developing national strategies, turn these into legislation, building coalitions of support. These are much more risk-averse behaviors, much more built around long-term thinking and risk management. And we have created political systems that are dominated by the fight and win, and which devalue or undervalue the govern and lead. And this is the place when we are looking at the business case for politics and political parties, where women's leadership really shows up as extraordinarily valuable. We just did some work with the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College in London, where we had some very smart researchers look at 500 different studies on the impact of women's political leadership. We used a 25-year time frame, started with Beijing, looked at today, those were our bookends. And what we found was something that for many people on this call will validate everything that you know. But the business case for women's political leadership in formal places is irrefutable. It is unequivocal. So we know from all of this work that when women show up in formal political spaces, as I watched WAFA do for many years, they work harder to represent their constituents. And as a result, citizens have a different relationship with government. Levels of trust appear to go up. We've got to probe this a little bit more, but we are seeing a correlation there. We know that public service delivery is suddenly prioritized in a way that also has a correlation with reducing levels of corruption, because services are more reliable, they're more high quality, they're accessible to everybody. You have much less elite capture going on in terms of state resources and services. So women show up, corruption goes down. Yay! We also know that they prioritize policies that lead to better health outcomes. People start living longer and they spend more of their lives in good health. And the primary beneficiaries of that gain are men, because men are socialized not to prioritize their own health and not to ask questions about health in public environments. We get greater investment in children that lead to better long-term outcomes, better value for money, and better investment in key economic drivers that lead to economic stability and growth. So the business case here of getting women into these formal political spaces is irrefutable. The path, as WAFA described and Meredith just described very aptly, though, remains extremely a minefield, really. So to answer Catherine's question about programming, the how comes back to the informal political spaces. It really, really does. We have a situation now where the majority of women who are entering formal political spaces still tend to be more elite than the men who are there. And in that, they lose their connection to civil society, which is so critical in terms of their ability to deliver, in terms of the information they have, and in terms of women in informal spaces being well represented. So programming really needs to look at sustaining that connection. Also, finding ways to support their connection to family. As again, WAFA very aptly described, when women enter formal political spaces, they swim in a shark tank every day. Who can provide the protection other than family? They know with family they can trust. And unfortunately, a lot of our programming to support women in politics has viewed those connections as nepotism rather than a critical source of support, trust, and a reliable resource for women. So finding ways to support those as well is very important. Catherine, I'm sure I'm at the end of my 4 minutes. I've got some great ideas, but we've got some great panelists here who do as well. So I'll defer to what happens next.
You have wonderful ideas. You all have wonderful ideas, and this is really a privilege to chair this panel. I mean, we've heard from you about the importance of political parties, and I like the way you put it between fight and win and govern and lead approaches to political parties, and the importance of thinking holistically. You also mentioned that about if we're really serious about getting women into politics, then we need to think about their context, their family, and so on, instead of labeling as nepotistic, I think is a very interesting idea. But I have to go now on to our final panelist, who I'd like to introduce and thank for her patience. So Laurel Weldon, welcome again. So Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Simon Fraser University. Laurel, I was wondering if you could say something to us about the role of social movements, including particularly women's movements, in influencing policy, notably feminist movement making and the amplification of women's voices for social change. So, and perhaps while you're doing so, just neatly tie in together observations from your fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to just say how pleased I am to be part of such an important discussion about maintaining our momentum towards gender equality. It couldn't come at a more important time. So I'm very pleased to be here. I think I was a bit more prepared for 6 or 7 minutes. So I'm going to just take an opportunity to try to make my remarks a little shorter. So I hope you'll forgive me. I want to just make my main points to make sure that if I get cut off, I get the main things through. So the main thing I want to say is that based on my research from 20 years, including multiple books, I would say that feminist movements have been the most important driver of policy change, advancing women's rights over the past 40 or 50 years. So we've talked about political parties, we've talked about women in government, but I think the informal sector is at least as important, if not more so, in driving large-scale policy change. And while the kind of partnerships with governments and other actors, both domestic and international, are important, autonomy of these movements has been critical to these successes. And also I want to mention that this is a long game. So, you know, some of the movements against, we see a lot of success in violence against women policies, for example, or policies in other areas. And we have to remember that in many cases, this is because of activism that's been going on for 40 or 50 years. So, you know, we have to adjust our expectations to some degree. And the two kind of big challenges I want to make sure we can talk about are the organized counter-mobilization that our movements now face in the globe. We have to be able to address this organized counter-movement against feminism, the anti-feminism that's around the globe right now, and also dealing, as many of the other panelists have mentioned, with inequalities and diversity among women. That's a key challenge for feminist organizing. Okay, so the main thing the first point I want to just make again that I've just said is that feminist movements have been the key driver of policy change, advancing women's rights over the past 40 or 50 years. And this is especially true in the area of violence against women, and I'd be pleased to talk about that more. But it's also true in areas such as reproductive rights or legal status at work, and even in the area of economic empowerment. You know, we wouldn't even have the concept of violence against women without feminist organizations. But even in the area, and so that has led us to focus a lot on the area of violence against women as a kind of clear place for feminist impact. And when we talk about economic empowerment, we also know that feminist movements have a clear impact there. And, you know, a lot of the times we think about kind of formal legal guarantees, but they're also in the area of kind of very day-to-day important improvements in women's well-being. I'm thinking here, for example, about the right to sit movement in Kerala in India, or advocacy for improvements to domestic workers' working conditions. So there's a wide range of areas in which feminist movements have had an impact. And I'd be pleased to talk more about that. We're also doing, I've also done a kind of big research project right now on feminist mobilization over the past 40 or 50 years to kind of get a sense of what's going on with feminist mobilizing globally. And it won't surprise you to find that there's been a tremendous expansion of feminist mobilizing over these decades. And it's been remarkable. And Beijing has the kind of international conferences that led up to Beijing, and Beijing itself have been key motivators, key mobilizers in expanding this mobilization, especially women's autonomous mobilization. So over the post-Beijing period, feminist movements have grown in both strength and autonomy. And between 1985 and 2015, for example, the strength and autonomy of feminist movements has doubled around the globe, according to our research. And this isn't just increased presence. In 1975, most countries did not have a strong autonomous feminist movement. By 2015, nearly every country in the world had an autonomous feminist movement. So it's not just increased presence. These movements have also been extremely influential, shaping a variety of sectors from economic institutions like the World Bank to Bollywood to the Oscars. So as probably is not surprising, and as some have mentioned, this growing influence has spawned considerable backlash. So one of the things to remember is that this isn't coming out of nowhere. It's a response to success, feminist success, which has been a long time in the making. But it is indeed a backlash, and it's organized. It's not, in the past, much of the opposition that feminists faced was kind of organic resistance. But the resistance we face today is different. Although I don't want to say that it's just emerged, right? It has been a little bit in the making. But we see a series of populist and authoritarian leaders, and it constitutes a sort of trend, even though these kinds of developments are similar but not identical. But a thing that, from Trump to Duterte to Bolsonaro to others, the thing that these leaders, Lukashenko, they all share is a kind of anti-feminism, actually, as well as their authoritarian or anti-democratic impulses. And it shares the kind of appeal to a fictive past, right? Where, families were united and the country was strong. And this is all part of the same thing. And it sets these leaders up to demonize feminists and dismiss them as threats to the nation, threats to their strong men, and threats to national strength. So they've branded these women as kind of weakening men and families. Of course, feminists have not been passive in the face of this counter-mobilization. Feminists have been counter-mobilizing in their turn. And what we've seen in the past 5 years has been a tremendous counter-mobilization of feminists to this backlash. So at the same time as we see this reaching a fever pitch with, for example, the Trump administration seeking to remove the word gender from UN documents, establishing an international coalition to end abortion rights in the Geneva Consensus Declaration. We also see that women mobilized to remove Trump from office. They were critical to both of the elections to do so. Lukashenko right now is promising to step down once a constitution has been agreed to. We may not believe him, but the point is that he and other authoritarian leaders are on their heels because of these democratic protesters. So as we
Laurel,
see
Laurel,
okay.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring you to a close shortly.
Okay, I'll say one thing. How about that? So
great.
The key thing from the success of feminist movements is it would not have happened had feminists not learned important lessons about how to build solidarity across difference. These lessons are even critical today. It's very clear that we have to maintain our solidarity in the face of unprecedented opposition. It's not been organized or as vigorous as it is today. We will not be able to maintain our common front if we don't continue to learn and improve our strategies for building solidarity across inequalities, across differences, as my counterparts have mentioned. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. And you tied in some conclusions from the other panelists. Thank you so much to all of you for what has been a super panel. We hear from Laurel the importance of not forgetting the social movements, the feminist movements that have been behind the changes that we have seen, and she alerts us to the danger of backlash and the struggles against that backlash, but it's very much where we are right now. We've heard from Shannon about the importance of thinking political, official political, as much as anything else. We also heard from Meredith the importance of rooting feminism in a pluralist ethic, which is also linked to what Laurel said about coalition building across inequalities and differences. And finally, to our first panelist, Wafa, who spoke to us about what it actually means to be a political citizen, engage as an elected representative, and some of the huge challenges that continue to be put in your path, the niche spaces that are accorded women, if they're accorded space at all. So with that, I just want to thank you all. I'm not reading to script anymore because this was just so passionate and enlivening that I don't need to. All I want to do is say thank you. You have been invaluable to this debate, and I'm looking forward to hearing how these discussions will follow on in the breakout sessions. So thank you.